Welcome to my podcast, From Illness to Awakening. I'm Allison Bruner, a somatic psychotherapist and shamanic energy healer, as well as someone who has coped with and overcome many years of chronic illness. I'm here offering support to you on your path of spiritual expansion, which can come from the experience of chronic illness. I want to share a story with you about a man many years ago who went to somatic psychotherapy sessions. He was not my client because I was a client. I was new to somatic psychotherapy, and the story was shared with me by my therapist at the time, who was trying to explain to me how somatic psychotherapy worked. This man was coming to therapy week after week, complaining about his marriage, specifically about his wife. He was really worried that the relationship was going to end, and he was fighting so hard to keep it going. Meanwhile, he also struggled with pain in his neck specifically, some in his back. And one day he came to therapy, and he said to the therapist, "You're not going to believe the pain in my neck is gone." Of course, the therapist thought he was talking about the physical pain in his neck. And in sharing more, the therapist realized he was talking about his wife. And the therapist said, "I thought you were talking about your actual physical neck." And he said, "That's gone too. The pain's gone too." And they realized that most likely it was not a coincidence. There is a book that I've loved looking through as I've worked with clients and myself over the years. When a client signs up to work with me and they fill out some intake information, and I ask about their physical health, I ask whether there are any physical health conditions that they're experiencing, and I go to this book called Metaphysical Anatomy by Yvette Rose. Most of the time, I'd say about 95% of the time, when I look up the meaning of the physical condition that they're experiencing, the meaning of it emotionally, spiritually, metaphysically, I find that in our work together, I can see the issues that are addressed in that book coming up. I've even many times asked clients for their permission to muscle test from that book. So let's say they're going through, we'll say fibromyalgia. And I look up fibromyalgia in the Metaphysical Anatomy book, and I read the description of what that points to as far as the emotional or metaphysical or spiritual causes of fibromyalgia. I muscle test to see which components of it are relevant to my client. And sometimes we'll just go directly to that in what we address in therapy. And many of my clients, I'd say about 70%, experienced either a reduction or a complete elimination of physical conditions that they were struggling with as a result of that work. So in somatic psychotherapy, therapists are trained to understand that early in life, some of the most of the experiences that we go through as children affect us in such a way that we have to come up with compensatory behaviors that compensate for the pains and the threats that we're experiencing as children to be able to survive adverse circumstances. And so, for example, someone who grows up in an environment where it is not safe to be vulnerable or wrong, and they learn that the only way to survive that childhood is to kind of come across as strong and impenetrable, and always right. They'll physically develop in such a way that they look, their upper part of their body is very strong. They tend to have a pinched butt, and the shoulders might be broader. They tend to kind of look sort of down, and often so the way that they're holding energy limits the free flow of universal life force energy through the body, creating, so they're contracting in certain areas so as not to be vulnerable to attack. And this can create physical illness later in life. Someone who's been traumatized repeatedly, they don't feel safe in their environment, will leave the body so much, withdraw so much, perhaps out here felt chaotic. And so you can see in their eyes and in their physical bodies, they look lighter on their feet. They look like it wouldn't take much effort to push them, and they'd fall over. Their eyes are sort of withdrawn. There's so many examples of this. This is called character strategy. And so in somatic psychotherapy, the reason why I'm bringing this topic to you today is to let you know that when we're dealing with chronic health issues, oftentimes these issues can be addressed through a kind of psychotherapy that goes deep into the psyche and into the places in the body where we hold trauma, where we hold um, limiting core beliefs about ourselves and the world, these beliefs that create contraction in us. And we can we can we can help people to come back into the body and be able to open back up to free flow of energy, feeling safe to feel emotions, feeling safe to be vulnerable, and helping people to contract less and less in the body and integrate all of the parts of ourselves that we've pushed down, pushed ourselves away from, disowned, because these parts eventually come up in some fashion, whether whether it's through patterned behaviors that keep us stuck and limited in our lives, or through an experience of physical illness. I was introduced to the Hakomi Method, which back then was called the Hakomi Method of Experiential Psychotherapy, back in 1996. I had to look up what it's called now. It's called the Hakomi Method of Mindful Somatic Psychotherapy now. And so when I came to that work, I had been dealing with, but this was not why I went to therapy. It just happened to be dealing with stomach aches and nausea a lot of the time, especially in the mornings before I'd go to work. And I'd been that way since I was a child. I'd always feel nauseated and sick in my stomach before I went to school. I also was diagnosed with ADD. I was an editor back then and a journalist, and I would go to work and I would try and write articles, and I couldn't focus. I would sit down to write, and I couldn't come up with anything. And my attention span was very short. But it happened to be that through this deep inner work that assisted me in feeling safer and safer being in my body, and was processing and releasing trauma and working with deep anxiety that I had been experiencing since I was very little. The stomach aches went away, and so did all of the symptoms of attention deficit disorder. And I was then able to go to work and concentrate, and I was able to write for lengthy periods of time without having to get up and do something different. So a lot of physical stuff was addressed, but not through intention. It's just, as a benefit, a side effect of the work. Now I just have to stop and restart the video recording because I'm a nonlinear thinker. And without a human being sitting in front of me, it's really easy to go off on tangents. And so, thank you for your patience with all of the constant editing. But prior to finding the somatic psychotherapist, which was life changing for me, all that was available to me was the types of therapy where people would analyze, have me talk about my past, and we'd psychoanalyze it, trying to understand why I was the way that I was, why I did the things that I did. But that never changed anything, it brought insight, but it didn't help me. It didn't bring about any healing. It didn't even make me like myself anymore, have more compassion for myself. Or there was the kind of psychotherapy where, I had to write down my thoughts and learn how to try and think differently to change the way that I felt and question all of my thoughts. And it always kept me up here in my mind, which is that's very easy for me to do. And that was not the medicine that I needed. The medicine I needed was to learn how to be embodied and to make friends with my emotions and to feel safe in my body and feel safe feeling emotions. So, somatic psychotherapy, when people contact me asking me, how will we work differently than I have all of these years, where I feel I've only gotten so far, and I feel like there's another level that I need to access in my healing work. I say that we start out in the present moment. I invite clients to bring their awareness inside, and there's a lot of self-study that's involved. It's, notice your internal response when you hear me say these words to you, or when you imagine certain scenarios. It's about being with your experience versus talking about your experience constantly in the third person and staying up here. We're bringing the experience down here into the body, and we're noticing what's happening in the now moment, and bringing in experiments and bringing in healing interventions so that we can shift our relationship to our outer world and to ourselves, to our inner world. We can process in the now moment and release things that have been stuck, things that have been that we've been holding down. One of the things I love most about somatic psychotherapy is that the therapist can get creative in their use of interventions. We can use psychodrama, for instance. Um, Clients can embody a part within themselves, like the inner critic, while I work virtually only. And so I might be sitting over here embodying the child part of the client, a part that feels unlovable. And they're the inner critic, the part that berates the child. And they'll talk to me from the point of view of the inner critic, saying the nasty things that it always says to the more vulnerable part. And then reverse that, and then I'm talking back to the child part from the inner critic's perspective, and they have these epiphanies, these ahas. Oh my god, I do this to myself all the time. We can use visualization. We can use I get really creative in that. So physical experiments are often used in the Hakomi method. So I'll give an example. When I was in my training, and I was in the role of client, and a teacher was working with me, showing the entire class a demonstration. I held a lot of tightness in my shoulders all of the time. So this teacher that was doing therapy on me for the group matched the tension in my shoulders, and so that my body didn't have to hold. The teacher, the therapist was doing it. And what that allowed me to do was kind of deepen in my experience. And I had flashes of memories from childhood in which I learned to, there were traumas that I experienced that where I braced and I would hold, and also felt like I had to bear the burdens in my life and the weights, on take them on myself for others to protect others. And so through these realizations, so I had these insights through the therapist matching my children. We worked with that to heal that, so that I no longer needed to do that as an adult. But as when I work with people online, I'll say to them, I'm going to match that pressure, for example, in the shoulders energetically. I'll have them with their permission, and I'll have them notice my hands here, and we're imagining their shoulders are here. And I'm actually doing energy work, which is not part of the somatic therapy intervention. This is what I do as an energy healer. So I match that pressure, and I bring it into the shoulders, and I say to them, pretend you can feel this. And they have the same sort of experience that I did with the physical touch in therapy. There are embodiment interventions. I was in my early years as a client, I was so identified with the depression that I felt day in and day out. So I was invited to become the depression and move through my life, my session, as though I was the depression, talking from its point of view. I was even told to walk a certain way. Actually, I got down on my hands and knees, and I was the depression, moving sort of like a lion. And what that allowed it to do was to just move through me. Eventually, I found myself cracking up, laughing at it all. And it's as though, I don't know, it's like the just the clouds parted and I saw through. I saw it. It's like the game was over. And I was free. I no longer felt that never ending, all pervasive depression. I got out of resistance to it. I stopped treating it like it was something I had to fight or overcome. I gave it full permission to be here. I became it, and then it moved. In the Hakomi Method, we get out of resistance to our experiences. We give them full permission to be present, and we even ask, how is this helping me? How is this trying to serve me? In my mid 20s, when I first moved to Philadelphia, I was all alone in the city, and I had no car, and I had to walk 20 some blocks home from work every day. And I would always stop at the grocery store, because without a car, going to the grocery store in a big city is kind of an ordeal. And I was so broke back then. I couldn't afford taxi or bus. And so I would make the most out of my walks home from work. So almost every single day I was stopping at the grocery store for meals, so that I didn't have to carry it all on, the weekends. And I kept buying these cookies were on sale, and I kept buying them, and they were always on sale every time I went to this grocery store. And I would go home thinking, I'm just going to have a couple, and I would eat a whole bunch and feel really guilty about it. I'm really panicked. I'm going to gain all this weight, and I'm going to get sick from this. And so I had a session with my psychotherapist, and she said, my somatic psychotherapist, and she said, that's okay. It's okay to eat those cookies. In fact, tomorrow I encourage you to buy 2 packs of these cookies, big cookies, EL fudge cookies. And I did. And she said, I want you to force yourself to eat them, all of them, even when you're full. Just keep eating them. And I couldn't even get through the first pack, and I thought I was going to be sick. And to this day, I can't even think about those cookies. Of course, now I know better. I know what's in those things, but it broke the addiction. I stopped trying to fight it, and I just fully gave myself over, and then no longer wanted it after that. But we also looked at how was the behavior trying to help me? I was all alone. I was bored. I had no friends. I was brand new in a city, and I realized in that session that I needed to feed myself in another way. I needed to go out and start participating in all of what the city had to offer and meet people. I was talking earlier about how I have worked with clients who've undergone trauma, and much of the time I'm referring to little t trauma. We've all experienced trauma. If we're living in this world, if we are human beings, we've all experienced trauma. But The Hakomi method is it was is not meant to address extreme trauma, uppercase T trauma. So I had to get additional training in somatic experiencing and sensorimotor psychotherapy. That there are therapists trained for years in those modalities. So if I get a client, if a client comes to me and wants to work with me who has extreme trauma, I refer them to practitioners in those two modalities. Um, but through all the years of, let me back up. So I work specifically with highly sensitive and empathic people. I work with people who might be considered old souls. Um, they feel like the black sheep of the world. They feel like they have more insight and don't fit in. They don't feel like they belong, or maybe they're a little more spiritually oriented, or they're more artistic. They tend to be teachers, artists. And what I find in common with among these clients and even in myself is a tendency to not fully have our feet on the ground, not fully wanting to live on this planet. There's this resistance to being here. And especially in those who are spiritually inclined or spiritually curious, there tends to be there's a tendency to want to fixate on the higher realms, and indulge our curiosities in all things etheric, less so in the material world. And through all of this inner parts work, though, and embodiment work, I have found that true spirituality, true the process of awakening happens more safely and more deeply, more profoundly, the more embodied that we are. Through the inner parts work, I was able to stop criticizing myself all of the time and start to, this might sound kooky, but truly fall in love with myself by having compassion for myself. It wasn't the intention in therapy to create self compassion. It happened through this self study and embodiment process. And eventually, I noticed that when I would go to some negative self talk, I started to hear the voice of my higher self that would tell me it's okay that you're about to engage in a behavior that you judge as not okay or toxic. I'm still okay with you. That was the beginning of my spiritual awakening process, was this self acceptance and this recognition that there was in me something divine no matter what I thought or did. This recognition of my divinity, my okayness. Also, I learned then through my training in shamanism that the human is what's divine. You know, there's this saying about being in the world but not of it. And I really want to emphasize the importance of being in the world. It is easy to fixate on the angelics, on the stars, on higher vibrations, and to leave the physical body and try and get out of the uncomfortable experiences that are part of being human. That's easy. The invitation, though, is to bring heaven to earth, to befriend our ego, to befriend the body, to bring more of the higher self into the physical body, because that increases personal power. That is the whole purpose of why so many of we spiritually minded beings came here, was to bring heaven to earth and to shift this earth into a higher vibration. not just from our own efforts. The earth has her own ability to do that as well, but as a team, all of us together. And there's one more thing I really love about somatic psychotherapy is that you don't have someone, the therapist is not telling you what's best for you. They're not giving you advice. In this self-study, inner work process, you're coming face to face with yourself with a capital S. You're asking your inner parts what they need. You're accessing your own inner wisdom, your guru. And that for me was also what facilitated more and more and more, greater and greater levels of awakening. And so what I would love to do for the next episode here is offer you a mini experience of, it's not necessarily psychotherapy, but a somatic practice. It's super simple, super beautiful, in my opinion. It's something that I try to do every single day. And you start as a result to develop a deeper relationship with yourself, a deepening friendship with yourself, and the ability to hear your own voice, to nurture yourself, to nourish yourself, and feel safer and safer being with yourself. So stay tuned. And until then, I, in this moment, am wishing you so much love, so much comfort and healing, just holding space for wherever you are in this now moment, encouraging you to know that wherever you are, whether it's a place that feels very uncomfortable to you or you're okay with, it's all right. And send me questions if you have any. Reach out to me at my website, AlisonBruner.com. If there's anything I can do to support you. Until next time.